Anyone who knows about World War II knows that the Soviet-German battlefield determines the success or failure of the warring parties. But most people will have some stereotypes about the Soviet-German war. For example, the Germans have fewer people and fewer resources, while the Soviets have more people, strong industry, etc. In other words, Germany must lose. But the real historical truth may surprise you. During more than half of the Soviet-German war, Germany actually has many advantages in many aspects. It's not like there's no chance. Next, we're on the basic premise of anti-fascism. To explore this issue on a historical level. Hello everyone. This is Wealth Accumulation Channel. The eve of the Soviet-German War. Germany has occupied an area of more than 2.47 million square kilometers of land. Population around 205 million. This can be called Europe's German invasion of China. Take the richest country in all of Europe, Germany's allies. In addition, there are more than 800,000 square kilometers of land and a population of 78 million. On the other hand, after the Soviet Union invaded Poland by Germany, partitioned Poland with Germany, newly incorporated into the Baltic Sea, three kingdoms reached 193 million people. At the same time, it owns more than 20 million square kilometers of land. Not counting other nationalities in terms of HR details. Nazi Germany had 15.5 million German men aged 29 to 39. Homo sapiens at the same time. The Soviet Union at the time had 31.5 million. Male population aged 29 to 39. But men of the same age. The ethnic Russian population is only 15 million. Certainly, these populations controlled by Germany cannot be fully exploited. But the human resources situation in Germany, it's not that bad. Manpower of countries in occupied areas, also more or less used by the Germans. On industrial resources, it is completely different from what many people imagined. Germany on the scale of the industrial system. According to the main industrial indicators, it far exceeds that of the Soviet Union. At this time there may be students will say no. World number 2 in the Soviet Union before World War II. Note that I mean the situation after Germany occupied all of Europe in 1941. Next, let's look at the data. German coal cylinders have the most obvious advantages. Sued before the war. 400 million tons of coal were produced in the area directly under German rule. 31.8 million tons of steel. The Soviet Union only had 150 million tons of coal and 17.9 million tons of steel. Enough coal to give Germany 70 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity. The Soviet Union is 48 billion degrees. Germany can drive 1.26 million units. Metal cutting tool table. Soviet Union 584,000 units. Germany has twice as many manufacturing workers as the Soviet Union. At the same time all of Western Europe was producing for Germany. There are 4,876 arsenals. France alone provides more than 1,300 trucks per year. Contains more than 1 million rounds of shells. But have to say, Germany is short of rare metals and oil. But in 1941 the situation. Germany and its occupying countries extracted 1.9 million tons of oil. 4.1 million tons of fuel synthesized from coal. In addition, the French. The reserves of a number of countries such as Belgium. 8.8 million tons of oil is basically enough for war. Handle industrial resources. Data throughout the war. Occupation fees charged by Germany in occupied territories. It's a huge income too. You can understand it as a protection fee. These can of course be used for war support. Like 1943. Germany transported supplies from occupied countries in Western Europe. DM 4.23 billion. Looking at the other side as Germany's opponent. In terms of cohesion, the Soviet Union also has some problems. Before the war, the internal contradictions of the Soviet Union were extremely sharp. Inside the Soviet Union, Ukrainian, Belarusian, Baltic Cossacks and various other less minority. Still on Stalin's 1928 to 1938 rapid. Hateful of the horrors of collectivization policies. Many people were exiled and starved to death. In addition, there are also the bad effects of the big cleaning. The foundation of the regime is actually up and down, solid and close to the center. Several regions of Europe, such as Belarus, Ukraine, peoples of the 3 Baltic states, eagerly awaiting Master Wang, always ready to eat Hu Jiang. On the military level, the German army can be said to have experienced many battles. During the campaign against Europe, let the German Blitzkrieg reached the peak with the cooperation of various armies. Can be called the all-victory banner before the invasion of the Soviet Union. In contrast to the Soviet Union, after the horrific purge, 3 of the 5 marshals of the Red Army, including Red Army Napoleon Tukhachevsky, all 11 Deputy Defense People's Commissars, all military commanders, naval and air force commanders and chiefs of staff, 14 of 16 group commanders, 136 of 60 of 199 division commanders out of 67 corps commanders, 220 out of 397 brigade commanders, 50% of all regimental leaders. More than 10,000 military officers were dismissed from active duty or the death penalty. A whole generation of military division commanders was killed. Lack of experience. Young officer he trained, pushed to a position where he was not competent. Here is an example. Major Sergei Biryuzov, in 1938, finished his own staff officer training. Then to the 30th Yakutsk Bubin's report. He was stunned to discover that the Chief of Staff, Political Commissar, and Chief of Staff, but almost all the key staff officers were arrested. A happy report turns into a ghost story in an instant. When he came to report, the higher authorities let him be the teacher. And this post, it was supposed to be 3 ranks higher than him. Only those who have more than 10 years of experience than him can be competent. Natural training and normal functioning are affected. This is also the catastrophe of the Red Army in 1939 to 1942. Sexual performance foreshadowed. Let's imagine the deputy commander Beryusov who drove ducks to battle. Heart after the outbreak of war. It must be 10,000 grass mud horses galloping. In addition, in terms of military theory, for the execution of Marshal Tukhachevsky, his mass life theory, mechanized troop formation discredited. Today's words are very politically incorrect, very discordant. Many publicly released Tukhachevsky's theoretical writings destroyed. We go back to Germany. In addition to the above comparative advantages before the war, Germany, there is another huge advantage that has been overlooked for a long time. I call it the first mover advantage. Germany suddenly went to war. Coupled with the chaos in the early days of the Soviet Red Army, make the German army invincible. During the 4 months of the German offensive, the vast territory of the Western USSR, 58% of all Soviet steel production, 63% coal, 42% electricity, and 38% food production. Large reserves of fuel, grain, livestock, minerals. And a full 75 million people. All sent to the Germans. Black and colored. Racing version of bearings, etc. Production of key weapons materials stalled for a while. In the first half of the war, the total industrial output value fell to 48% before the war. 8.04 million Soviet combat inspectors in 1 year. Among them, 2.5 million were killed, 4.34 million were captured, and 1.2 million were disabled. Such a loss led the Soviet industry, which was originally lagging behind Germany, further behind. Just the population in hand. Only 120 million people left in the Soviet Union. And the German occupation zone has a full 280 million people. Before the war started in May 1941, Germany already has 1.75 million foreign workers and 1.27 million prisoners of war as labor. Not to mention after the war, gained another 75 million people in the Soviet-occupied zone. And millions of Soviet prisoners of war. This state of affairs continued until 1944. Soviet counteroffensive. After retaking Ukraine and Belarus. Barely relieved. Germany has so many advantages. But in the end the Germans still failed. There are many reasons for this. Or is it due to internal problems in Germany? We'll talk next. What are the problems? Let Germany play a good card, so that the whole family explodes. At the same time, from God's perspective. Let's see how Germany should operate. The possibility of victory. First is mobilization. In terms of utilization rate and mobilization of human resources, Nazi Germany can be said to be a mess. Germany was in 1944. The mobilization of soldiers reached the standard of the Soviet Union in 1941. It is also extremely wasteful in terms of troop composition. For example, in September 1943, when the German army was at its peak, of the 9.8 million regular troops of the army, the field army has only 4.5 million people. The Air Force removes the in-flight ground handling. There's even a ground force. Air Force Field Division. This thing also has a scale of 150,000 people. And poor combat effectiveness. Besides, the German Navy, Army and Air Force. There are a total of 2.13 million as a reserve army. This reserve army does not undertake combat missions. Plus Germany's non-field SS guards. But the size of the police force is also very large. Although on paper, armed forces of Nazi Germany reached a staggering 13 million people in 1943. But the troops confronting the Soviet Union on the front line were only around 3 million. Really nothing to say. Besides, mobilization in the field of industrial production. Germany is also careless. 1939, when the Great War broke out. German workers only work 47.8 hours a week. This is even happier than today's office workers. Even at Ragnarok. In 1944, the working hours were only 48.3 hours. By contrast, the USSR, even a year before the war broke out, workers worked 56 hours a week. After the war broke out, the Soviet government again increased the weekly working hours. Extend 1 to 3 hours. Cancel all vacations. The same goes for women's employment. Throughout the war, women's employment rates remain low in Germany. Until May 31, 1944. German society. Only 35% of women are employed outside of agriculture. Most German women still take care of their children at home. Enjoy the quiet time. Late war. Hitler's armament minister, Albert Speer, has described. Not only did Germany fail to increase the number of women in employment to make up for the gap. Instead, in order to reduce the burden on German housewives, the German government exclusively from Ukraine, more than 500,000 women were recruited as nannies. Are you kidding me? Although Germany carried out the so-called general mobilization in 1943, but the German military industry at that time, only 31% of Germany's industrial capacity, less than 50% of steel is used to produce munitions. Production of consumer goods seriously restricted the German arms industry. Can you imagine two people risking their lives to fight? One side fights with both fists. The other party only used one hand to fight. Such a magical picture. In fact, it is inseparable from the physique of Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany wasn't what most people think. Shocked. All the Germans are fighting chicken blood. Hitler wanted to make Nazi Germany work. Have to balance the interests of all. Junker, landowner, capitalist, industrial magnate, bureaucrats, middle-class citizens, etc. They each have their own demands. Nazi. And Hitler himself never did. Real response. Even if Hitler himself met big men like industrial magnates, still be polite. So, Hitler couldn't force companies to produce what? Citizens cannot be forced to work overtime, let alone force local officials. Hand over rich human resources. In the end we can only die together. So Germany wants to win. The core interests of all forces. Minimum requirement. Make every effort to mobilize all human and material resources that can be mobilized. Do it ahead of time even in 1943. Battle of Stalingrad. The level of mobilization after failure, while in the field of armed forces personnel, increase the proportion of the field army as much as possible. After restricting the Air Force Field Division size of armies, this is consuming the Lenin flag. Would not have such a big disadvantage as in history. To know Su Lian really used his last breath. War 1. It can be seen from the post-war data that the Soviet Union in manpower, industry, and agriculture have reached their breaking point. In the later period, the Soviet army even recruited no trained civilians in newly liberated areas. Directly join the army. Therefore, even if Germany mobilized slightly in advance, might also have a big impact on the balance of power. Followed by political. Like Prussian military strategist Karl von Clausewitz said, only by using the effect of internal division to conquer evil. So to dismantle the USSR. What Nazi Germany would do. Just entered the territory of the Soviet Union as a liberator. End its collectivization policy. Restoring the wronged property of the people. In this way he can not only win Belarus, support of Ukrainians, might even shake Stalin's army. Because most of them are composed of collectivized peasants. The Germans let them regain the land. Still have property. Will they still fight the Germans? That's what Stalin was afraid of. Reasons for the German invasion. And Stalin didn't believe it either. Germans are so stupid. Only use the army to fight the war. The Soviet Union went on the offensive aggressively at the start of the war. Also here, since the Soviet Union admitted that they were caught off guard and were not prepared enough, why do you want to fight back desperately? And even send away more troops in vain? Not mostly. Few people believe that the decision-makers do not understand the situation on the front line, or the so-called all-time offense tradition of thought. But too much fear of the enemy. Take advantage of their internal conflicts to gain strong support, to completely dismantle their regime. The beginning of the war. German frontline soldiers are also obviously feel the heat of the locals. Ukrainian aunt. Cordial bread with eggs. To welcome German troops. Many German soldiers recalled. Local Soviet peasants would stop their tanks. Let them drink milk before leaving. Leitlinger once wrote. If Germany put a similar 1918. President Ruesen's 14-point proposal was brought into the Soviet Union. Then the Soviet Union. It will be like Germany in World War I. Crash surrender. So early in the war. Mass surrender of Soviet troops, not just a matter of tactics. There are also internal contradictions in the Soviet Union. But then the Germans took the opposite approach. Hitler declared Ecuadorian Slavs an inferior race and decided to wage a genocide war. As the German army marched into the Soviet Union, the SSSS in Germany followed suit, frantically suppressing war and plundering the occupied areas. Let the Russian occupation zone become a hell on earth. The two factions of each ethnic group in the occupied area choose their relatives. Back in the arms of Stalin again. This is actually very stupid. Not only reduces the utilization value of the occupied area. Moreover, maintaining law and order also wastes a lot of German manpower, further weakening the German frontline forces, triggering a series of chain reactions. For the Soviet Union, Germans are so brutal and bloody. Let the resistance led by Bolshevik Khan Stali. The German war became unprecedentedly turbulent. The nationalities of the Soviet Union also united as never before. Internal problems plaguing Germany. It doesn't exist here in the Soviet Union. So why is Germany doing this? In the final analysis, all because of Nazi ideology, is based on the so-called, based on ethnic superiority, plus myopia from top to bottom. He is blindly confident. Caused a ruthless squeeze on the huge Soviet-occupied area. The Germans think I'm winning the war anyway. Why be submissive? I hit hard. Enough. So even if Germany is temporarily time to abandon racial policies that harm others and ourselves, gain the hearts and minds of the occupied territories. A little self-aware. So, not only the security situation in the occupied areas can be greatly improved, it can even increase the manpower and material resources in the occupied area. Works for me to a certain extent. The policing forces can also be freed. Deploy in more important locations. Germany may not need to be at the military level, waging this war so laboriously. Balance of power. Maybe another weight will be added on the German side. Above. It is an exploration of the possibility of Germany defeating the Soviet Union. I have thought about it before. Let's talk a little bit about military strategy and tactics. But then I thought, if Germany is struggling to mobilize, politically unable to make changes, so no matter how hard you try in the military, it may not be possible to change the outcome of failure. In the end, I want to say that history cannot tolerate assumptions. Numerous accidents and inevitability have promoted the development of history. Hindsight is of course easy. However, under the specific circumstances of the year, the parties concerned, for various reasons, often fail to make the right countermeasures. Of course, thanks to the Nazis' brain-destroyed operations in World War II. Let yourself defeat life and death. Haven't let the fascist reign of terror plague the world. This can be regarded as the butterfly effect of history. Our luck. So that's the end of this issue. Welcome to subscribe to the Wealth Accumulation channel. See you next time.